All right, I have begun recording, so take it away, Ryan and Kathy. Thanks so much.
Okay, Kathy, go ahead. You introduce yourself and then I'll take it.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, I'm Kathy Nguyen. I'm a specialist of community action here at WWF Canada. Thank you so much for having us. At WWF Canada, I get to work on our Living Planet at School, Living Planet at Campus, and Go Wild School Grants programs. These programs drive towards helping a very important cohort, students, tomorrow's leaders and decision makers, to take conservation action with us. And through these programs, students, educators, and schools, campuses too, you'll be able to help us in creating and restoring habitat for wildlife across Canada, building what Ryan will tell you is Canada's biggest wildlife garden. So I'll be hopping on in a little bit to share with you guys a little bit more about that work and how you can be bringing to life what Ryan's going to be talking about in these programs at your school, at your campus, and at home as well. Ryan, take it away.
Okay, cool. Hi, all. My name is Ryan. Am, I call myself the botanist in residence at WWF Canada. So I deal with all kinds of planty questions. And I do a lot of work in a bunch of different programs, and they all have the theme of restoring habitat using native plants and restoring relationships between people and plants too. That's my favorite thing. So you're going to meet some of my favorite plants with whom I have developed a special bond. And I hope that by the end of it, you're going to be excited about building relationships with your own plants in whatever kind of space that you have. And I'm gonna try to set you up for success to do that in a good way. Okay, this plant, for example, that's right here on screen is one that is one of my favorites. If anyone knows what it is, throw it into the chat. Um, but I will just okay. I'm not seeing. Oh, I see a couple of guesses, but I can't see the chat actually right now. The plant is a goldenrod. It's called blue stem goldenrod. So it's one of the goldenrods that lives in shady conditions. Looks a little bit different, much smaller than the typical Canada goldenrod that people know. And I grow it on my balcony. It's self-seeded, so it comes back year after year. And we'll see one of its close relatives, zigzag goldenrod, a little bit later when we go outside. Okay, so let's get into it. Next slide. Okay, so I like to start off with definitions. We're doing it in the form of a word cloud, which is fun. So, um, to me, a garden is any space where people and plants have a relationship together. So it's a pretty broad definition, but it includes a lot of different spaces, and I love framing it in that way about relationships specifically. Ecology, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but is the science of how plants and animals interact with each other and their environment. Native plants are those plants that have lived in your local space for thousands of years. There's really no substitute for them. They're so special because of their coevolutionary relationships and the way that they're adapted to local conditions. We're going to meet some of them a little bit later, and I will talk a little bit more about what qualifies as a native plant as well. Ecological restoration is bringing ecosystems back to life once they've been degraded and destroyed. I'll talk about that too. Stewardship, you know what? These are just a whole bunch of things that you can keep in mind, that you can include in your life. And today, a botanist, you have a botanist in your life. It's me. I'm your personal botanist for the next little while. And I hope that will be meaningful for you in some way. Um, I want to talk about nature-based solutions a little bit here. That's something we talk about a lot at WWF because these are the solutions that at the same time are able to restore wildlife habitat and in so doing fight against biodiversity loss, but they also can sequester carbon, which is really cool. It's like a multi co-benefit kind of situation. A lot of people think about it as just planting trees, and obviously trees are great, but we like to talk about way more than just planting trees. We want to plant forests, we want to plant ecosystems, and not just forest ecosystems, but also meadows and wetlands, and we want to restore coastlines and blue carbon. We want to include indigenous perspectives in this as well. It's important that these nature-based solutions uplift um, indigenous peoples and communities as well. And so that's really all I want to say about that. Nature-based solutions, it's not just trees, it's also other stuff too. um, here is, I want to talk about this challenge and how you can be part of the solution. So this map here shows Southern Ontario, but this is really a pattern that's echoed all across developed areas in the world. And that is that, so the green areas here are considered to be healthy and functioning landscapes. A lot of these are protected areas, and they're places where there's lots and lots of native plants. There's lots of habitat in those green areas. But unfortunately, the green only represents 15% of this particular area, denoted by the squiggly line at the top. So the south of the squiggly line is called the Carolinian Zone. It's a very special region in Canada with more biodiversity and more species at risk than anywhere else in Canada. But again, it's true in other regions as well. So we've only got 15% green stuff, and our studies show that you actually need to get 30% or greater in these landscapes in order to see wildlife starting to recover. And the challenge here is that most of this is privately owned land. So protected areas, public protected areas, it's important, it's a crucial part of the picture, but it's not enough. So we need to restore and enhance ecosystems everywhere we possibly can, including on our balconies and our backyards and our boulevards and just every single imaginable space. So I talked a little bit about ecology before. It's that science of relationships between living organisms and their non-living surroundings. It can get pretty complicated, ecology, if you get into the science of it. So we're not going to have an ecology lesson here, but I'm just going to distill a lesson out of ecology for you from my years of training and learning in this field. And that is, in order to do this ecological restoration thing, at least when it comes to terrestrial ecosystems, so land-based ecosystems, the best way to do it is with native plants. You just plant native plants in the ground and magical things happen. It's not magic, it's science, but it's also wonderful and brings me a lot of joy. And I think it'll bring you joy too. So here's what it can look like. This is a restored wetland in the southern Mississauga area near the shore of Lake Ontario. So it looks like a natural space, but this is actually a human-built and restored ecosystem. So people planted all of these plants, well, a lot of them anyway, took out invasive species and created this habitat. Very cool. But where are the people? Okay, so if we go to a landscape like this, which is the Don Valley in the Greater Toronto Area, um, we see that there's some signs of humans as well as signs of nature. So this is kind of a place where there's both things happening. And in a landscape like this, the tools and specific strategies of ecological restoration are a bit different, but the philosophy is the same. Okay, get native plants in there. Basically, is the thing to do. And then what about if we go to a place like this? This is the downtown financial core of Toronto with the lights off during Earth hour. That's why it's a little dimmer than usual. So how do we think about this as an ecological space? How could we get native plants and habitat into this kind of landscape? What a wonderful challenge. What a beautiful thing to turn our minds to and think about how to do it. I'm going to give you an idea by the end of this this lecture. Hopefully, it's not too much of a lecture. This webinar, this conversation that we're having here. Okay, so what makes a native plant? This is an important kind of just technical slide, but what I want to tell you is that not all plants that you might find at your local garden center, which have the words native species on them, are necessarily the best choice for your ecological restoration project. So it's important that the species is native to the region, as is right in the definition, but the source also needs to be local. And things like genetic variation, cultivars, pesticide, and collection, how the plant was actually collected from the wild, are all also really important things to consider. So the best way to figure this out is by having a conversation with your grower, having just an honest dialogue about where do these plants come from exactly, and see what you can see. But you can also find this tag. If you ever find our In the Zone garden tag, which is getting out into more and more places, and Kathy will talk a bit about how uh, that's happening this year in more garden centers. If you find this tag, it answers this question, all these questions for you. This is a good plant. This is a perfect plant for ecological restoration if you find this tag, which is wonderful. Okay, so with that, we're going to transition over to this particular solution, this wonderful solution that anyone with even a small outdoor space can do. Container gardens. So container gardens, I've got a picture here that I took from Wikipedia of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, showing container gardens from thousands of years ago. So we've been doing this for a really long time and in lots of different ways too. So you can see we have a bonsai tree here, part of the Japanese tradition of container gardening with trees. Here's one of my container gardens where I have succulents. I'm creating an arid ecosystem there. That's an indoor garden. And here's a picture I took in on the south coast of the United Kingdom, where it's a shore. There's not nobody really had lawns when I was visiting this place, but there were container gardens everywhere, and so it's something that lots and lots of people are doing, and we can do it with native plants too, believe it or not. So here on the right is one of the ways that I've done this, and I'm going to show you some more examples of this soon outside. Um, so these are just some pictures of my balcony garden from last year. And one of the ways, actually 3 of the different ways that I like to measure how I'm succeeding in ecological restoration are through biodiversity. So how many species are visiting or are resident in that garden. So I've got over 30 native plant species in my tiny little balcony garden. I've I've identified over 12 species of bees and other insects. Um, and in terms of ecosystem services, those are the things that I harvest or the things that I get. I do harvest teas. I love rubbing the leaves and getting all kinds of smells on my fingers, and it's really my little like relaxing Zen space. It's keeping me a lot more sane than I otherwise would be during this pandemic era. That's for sure. That's a service. And in terms of connectivity, it's also a way for me to connect with other local patches. Bees will come by and pollinate my little flowers during the summertime, and they'll go visit somebody else. And likewise, I actually like to share my garden with other people by harvesting seeds from my plants in the fall. And this past year, I sent those out in the mail, which was quite fun. Okay. Um, some things to keep in mind um, as you're doing container gardening are conditions. So you really do need to have a good idea of your conditions. Some people like to spend an entire year just observing their garden conditions. Um, and that's also could be true on a balcony. You want to really know where are those lights and shadows coming in. Here is a picture of a light map that I did of my balcony some years ago where I discovered that one of my corners was getting about 4 more hours of direct sunlight than the other corner. So it's important to do this. I'm not going to tell you exactly how to do it right now, but if you just look up light map on Google, you will figure out how to do it. And you can do it in one day. It's a pretty simple exercise. But you also want to know about water. Do you have a rain shadow on your balcony? Is it a very windy situation? What's your soil going to be like? I'll tell you a little bit about substrate later. And what are also the kind of animals that might be visiting and how might they interact with your garden too? Okay. Um, I wanted to show you a bit about my tools. So these are the tools that I like to use often on my balcony. I do have a hose that I hook up to my kitchen sink and I lead it through the entire apartment, bring it out to the balcony. That saves me a lot of time going back and forth watering, especially during the summertime when things can get pretty dry. So if you can manage it, go for it. But otherwise, you can get by quite fine with a watering can. I have my secateurs, my gardening knife, and then a bunch of little tools that look like they're for children, but I use them and they do really well in my little container garden. Um, and some other things here on the left that also come in handy from time to time: bamboo, tarps, clips, various different sorts of things. Okay, I want to talk about the plants now that I like to use. So when you're thinking about container gardens, the soil is going to be shallow. I'm going to tell you a little bit about sizes of containers once we go outside, but you're not going to have very deep soil compared to being a garden in the ground. it's just going to be shallow. So I think it is very sensible, and it turns out that this works, to think about native plants that grow in shallow soils already. So I'm showing you a few ecosystems here. These are sunny ecosystems, shorelines, and alvars, which are shallow soil ecosystems. So the type of plants that grow here, like this camas lily, and on the left and on the right, we have an alvar ecosystem. So that's, sometimes they just look like a parking lot, but it's out in the wild. And there's all kinds of little plants coming up in the cracks, like wild columbine, wild strawberry, prairie smoke. We'll see prairie smoke. My prairie smoke is about to flower. Um, and then if you have a shady balcony, then you can use ecosystems like a shallow forest in which we have wild leeks growing and various types of violets and Solomon seal, things like that. Or you could think of a cliff, which gets sun part of the day and shade part of the day, depending on which way it's facing. So the plants that grow on those cliffs could do very well on your balcony as well. Okay, so with that, how are we doing for time? Do we have plenty of time to go out to the balcony? Okay, first I want to show you my seeds a little for a moment. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to do a little bit of magic here for you.
Ryan,
So
I love your magic tricks.
okay, so here we are. Hello, hello. We've got an external camera, and right next to me here, I wanted to show you this, which is happening right now, and it is really exciting to me. Um, so these are a variety of seeds, which I started out on the balcony in this tray. I put the seeds in this tray last fall. I left them out on the balcony for the winter, because our seeds of native plants do need a wintering period, most of them before they will germinate. And then in the spring, back in early March, I uncovered the tray, so it was sort of a little bit protected, and I saw things start to come up, and I brought those inside, and you can see over here my little grow setup with my grow light, and I've been kind of accelerating the natural processes to get them to this point. So I have my swamp milkweed here. I have this is Canada wild rye, and lots of other little asters and goldenrods popping up here. It's been a hugely successful seed season for me, and I wanted to share these little babies with you before we head out and see some bigger plants in containers. So it's just going to take me about 90 seconds to move on outside. So maybe Kathy, if there's a question in the chat, or maybe
Yeah,
you just want to
absolutely.
take the reins for a moment while I just pop off and then come right back on.
More magic from Ryan coming. So there is a question from TRC programs. What floor are you on? You're saying that you started a pollinator garden on the 17th floor and saw a bee the other day. That is amazing. I was living in a building on the 30th floor, and with the container garden that Ryan inspired me to create, we were seeing butterflies up there. So I know people often say you don't see wildlife coming up that high, but what are we seeing? It's pretty incredible.
I've heard of people with pollinator gardens up as high as the 20 something floor, and they do see some bees from time to time, but it's less frequent for sure. I'm on the 6th floor is the answer to that question.
Lots of really great comments. A lot of love for your container garden, Ryan. Someone asked, how many species do you see visiting?
Could you repeat that, Kathy? How many species?
Yeah, how many species of wildlife do you see visiting typically your balcony?
Okay, so here we are out on the balcony. Let's just give you a quick pan. The answer is, so in terms of insects, I've mentioned that I've seen 12 species total. Here's just some little plants I have visiting as well. These are not permanent, but they're just here for the time being, hanging out. Um, but most commonly, there's about 5 species of bumblebees. I do get European honeybees as well, and some sweat bees and smaller andrenid bees. So I'd say there's about 5 common visitors in the summertime, and then some rarities that show up just from time to time. And I wanted to show you quickly, because this is like the most exciting thing of my whole life. Can you see this little flower here? My little strawberry flower that just bloomed this morning. Love that, love that. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about these containers. So as you can see, I've got these larger containers in cloth bags. And why do I use the cloth? Okay, I've tried lots of different types of containers, including plastic ones and terracotta and metal ones even. And these ones work really, really well. I gotta say, these cloth bags, these ones happen to be a brand called Root Pouch. You don't need to get those, but they happen to be made out of upcycled plastic water bottles, which is kind of cool. And they are the size. The size is what's important here. So notice that they're like fairly large. They're sort of the size of a sort of regular garbage can, but cut in half. It's about 40 centimeters across and 35 centimeters deep. The reason that I recommend that, I do have some smaller containers here, and I have to water these a lot more, and not as much will survive over winter with these. I find they tend to just the temperature swings in the spring lead to some mortality sometimes, which is sad. We don't want plants to die. We want them to live and survive and thrive. And I I mean, the cool thing about all of these plants is that they came back this year. I didn't plant them. They were here all winter. They went to sleep, and then they came back. These violets, these green-headed coneflowers here, all of my strawberries. This is a yellow pimpernel. Which looks like it's got a flower coming up pretty soon. That's cool. Um, Over here, this is my sort of my woodland garden. I've got these wild leeks. I told you they might be a good idea. Plantain-leaved sedge flowering there. Here's the zigzag goldenrod. I told you, I promised that we would take a look at. That's coming up. Amazing. Um, so if you want to get all this variety of species, I do recommend just going for larger containers. In terms of substrate, now, what do I fill these things with? It's a combination of things. I've tried many things, but basically peat-based potting soil is what you're going to find a lot of the time. And it works. I've filled entire containers with that. Sometimes I do 50% that and 50%, here, let's flip this around. You can see me for a second. Coconut coir I use as well sometimes. You'll also see some of my containers have rocks in them. If I'm simulating a rocky ecosystem, then I will put rocks in. This one over here is simulating a kind of beach, sand dune situation. So I've got a lot of sand in that one. So you can play with the substrate quite a lot. Just think about where the plant would be living in the wild, basically. And you don't want to use, the important thing here is don't just dig up sort of garden earth for this. That will be too heavy. You want something a lot lighter than that for sure. So mix in some peat, peat-based potting soil or coconut coir. So I've talked about size, I've talked about substrate. We've talked about the plant composition, but like, so how do you build one of these? How do you make it look nice all together? Something to think about is heights. So I love something about container gardens that's really cool is like this yellow pimpernel is a pretty small plant. It's not only going to get sort of about this high total. And in a larger garden, that might get lost. But in a small container garden, um, you can really get up to it. You can sort of feature it there. It'll be right in front of your eyes. And I think that's wonderful. So you can go for some of the smaller, sort of delicate plants. And that works really well. One sort of thing that you can think about to remind yourself of composition is you can think of spillers. So strawberries like to send runners across and kind of spill off of the sides. Fillers like the grasses, the Canada wild rye here, and the violets could be fillers that are sort of going to fill in the middle. And then thrillers are tall plants like what have I got? Well, these green-headed coneflowers, for example, will be quite tall. Over here, I have yellow giant hyssop. These little guys that are just little now, but they're going to get much bigger throughout the summer. So some tall plants are a good idea to mix in as well. Um, what else do we want to tell you about that? I mean, that really just try it. Just get started. We've got a lot of resources online that Kathy's going to tell you more about. And what I want to tell you really is you can do it. You can do this. It's not that difficult. Um, you can be connected to your local ecosystem. You can help wildlife thrive, and you can build a beautiful space for yourself too. Using some of our tools and finding some beautiful native plants. Hopefully, you've maybe jotted down some of the examples that I'm using. And I think, well, we do actually have a little bit more time to, so why don't we, Kathy, are you seeing a question in the chat that maybe I could
Yeah.
take?
Yeah, there's a couple of great questions.
Okay.
So Kara asked, why the coconut? Yes,
Yeah,
why
why
the
coconut coir? Okay, there's a bit of a debate about this in the gardening world. Peat is a substance that you need to dig up a wetland to get peat, basically. And some people find that a little bit difficult, and would prefer to have something that's more sustainable. Um, Arguably, coconut coir, because it's a renewable resource, is something that's produced on the outside shell of a coconut. There's lots of coconuts around the world. You could argue that that's more sustainable. However, there are no coconuts growing here in Canada, so those materials are having to be transported here. Those transportation costs and associated carbon emissions need to be calculated as well. So for me, it's a little bit of a bit of a toss up between peat and coconut coir. Sometimes I mix them. I haven't come down clearly on one side or the other, but that's what that's all about.
Thanks, Ryan. There's a
Uh,
question Kara asked about, are there endangered native plant species in Canada? I know you know the answer
oh,
to this.
there are
You've
many.
taught me.
Yes, yes, there are quite a few, dozens in fact, of endangered native plants. Many of them are in that region, the Carolinian zone that I showed on the map earlier. Um, and yeah, the thing that threatens them often is habitat loss. That's the main problem. We've um, really, through the process of colonization, um, just shrunk the habitat into tiny little pockets that are fragmented across the landscape, and that is the the main reason why lots of plants and the insects and mammals and birds that rely on those plants are kind of struggling. And that's what this whole mission is about here, is restoring that habitat, bringing it back to this landscape, and giving not just those plants, but also the animals, and insects and the whole ecosystem, the space that it really deserves to have in this landscape.
Thanks, Ryan. So there's a follow-up question to that.
Yes.
Which ones would grow best in container gardens when we're thinking about those ones
Oh,
that are truly at risk?
at-risk plants. Okay. Well, I mean, okay, I tried a lakeside daisy once, I'll tell you, and that's a shoreline plant. So it would grow well in a shoreline type container with lots of rocks. I tried it, I didn't succeed, which was a little bit sad. So I'm not sure what happened exactly there, but that's one example. Um, Believe it or not, this green-headed coneflower is considered to be a rare species in southern Ontario, and it grows really well. I'll tell you, like I've got a lot of it. If you need some seeds, let me know because I make hundreds of them every year. Um, some species, so it's really just it's about the habitat. You need to look up the species, where it lives, and check for that shallow soil condition. If it grows in a place where there's shallow soils, you could give it a try. If it likes to be in deep soils, or if it's a tree like a cucumber magnolia, for example, I wouldn't recommend it. I have not had a lot of success with shrubs and trees. I feel there might be some lessons to learn, but I haven't learned them yet. I'm still learning. We're all still learning, aren't we? Um, Kathy, what do you think? Should we well,
I have a question for you that
yeah, yeah,
I
of
think
course.
leads into your next section so
Sure.
perfectly. So I know that you want to talk about maintenance of your
Mm.
container garden. So Maureen had a great question around soil. Do you need to add new soil each year?
Very good question, and thanks for reminding me. Yes. So we will tie this into maintenance, but one of the maintenance activities, and you'll find this, by the way, in one of our resources, the container gardening guide that Kathy will talk about a little bit later. But in that guide, we talk about activities to do during each season to keep your native plants happy. And in the springtime, one of the things we talk about is fertilization. And here I'm not talking about getting liquid fertilizers and watering your plants with them. What I use is solid fertilizer. So I want to show you, if you can see, this container is quite dark, and there's a little bit of eggshells you can see in some spots. So what I've added here is actually home compost. I didn't make this compost, but a friend of mine did, and let me have some in exchange for plants, I think is what the trade that I did. And she does vermicomposting at home, so that's when you use little red wiggler worms, and she put her food scraps in there, made some compost, and I like to use either compost, worm castings, or composted manure, just a handful or so every year. I add to the top of the containers, and that keeps the nutrient levels good. But otherwise, my oldest container is this one. It's been going for 4 years, and I haven't changed the soil out. It's the same soil that it always was, and I've had plants growing in here all 4 years. I just keep coming back, like this weird carrot thing here that has never flowered, so I can't figure out what it is yet. It just came with another plant, but it comes back every year. Many of these containers are 3 years old, and I have not needed to change out the soil. So that's a nice plus, a nice bonus of these things. Once they're created, basically add a little bit in the spring and you're good to go. In terms of watering, watering is something that you do need to focus on in the summertime. Like I said, larger containers need less watering. So, if you have containers about this size, then you don't need to worry about leaving for the weekend or, getting a plant sitter. Whereas if all of your containers are about this size, maybe 10 or 15 centimeters across, then you will need to be watering probably daily during the summer. So that's just why I don't think it's a great idea. In the fall, I like to gather leaves from, honestly, usually it's leaf bags at the side of the road. I bring them up to my balcony and I sort of bed down the garden by putting a layer of leaves at the top. I like to leave this little kind of edge on my containers, a few centimeters, where I can really pack down a little blanket of leaves. And that's all I do for overwinter. I used to tarp my containers over, but for the last 2 years, which, mind you, they've been fairly mild winters the last 2 years, but I have not tarped down, and it appears that I didn't need to either. So those are the main things. There's a few more items you'll find on that guide as well, but that will basically get you through your first year. And it's not that much. It's a little bit of give and take, a little bit of a reciprocal relationship you'll build with your plants, and hopefully that will be just a huge success. Now, Kathy, I know you have some slides to share, some information for the people. So why don't you get into that?
I'll screen share. So there were some comments in the chat around advice for new gardeners or people who are new to making small gardens. And I just want to jump in here because Ryan really inspired me with container gardens. I didn't have a garden prior to meeting Ryan. Living on my own, I just didn't think I had the space. I had a balcony, so he hooked me up with a container garden, and I realized how hardy native plants are. They are so hardy compared to the ornamental plants that you're going to find in a typical nursery. So that gave me a lot of comfort because, guys, I didn't water mine that often. I think Ryan made me one that was a bit drought resistant. So it survived. It survived me, and it survived winter. I did not tarp mine. I didn't think about that process. And when spring came, we saw lots of things sprouting up. So we still see lots of butterflies, lots of moths, lots of caterpillars visiting. So if it helps you to know, like, just don't get discouraged by the idea of planting a habitat. It's amazing that a garden can be a habitat in this way, but it is really quite accessible, and it's a learning process. Like Ryan said, we're all still learning, including an expert like Ryan. So I'll share a little bit about how you guys can get started. WWF Canada, we want to engage you, whether you're a school teacher, whether you're a student, whether you're someone who's in the workplace and you want to drive something like this in the workplace. We've got you covered. So we want to be there for the journey that you're going to be embarking on throughout all the chapters of your lives. So if you are in primary school, secondary school, as a student or an educator, let us know in the chat. But there is a program for you. It's our Living Planet at School program. And Living Planet at School is a great way for you to get started with planting native plants on your school grounds. We saw a great question from Hong Liang about, urban city schools. How do we change it so that there's more habitat in these areas? Go Wild School Grants through our Living Planet at School program offers educators and students the opportunity to create their best ideas that will help nature to thrive and pitch it to WWF for up to $500 in funding. So over the past 5 years, we've seen lots of gardens, lots of habitats, a lot of habitat being restored and created through our Go Wild School Grants program. So look out for information about that every September on our school's website. We also have coming up a really great initiative that Ryan's starting called the Habitat Stewardship Initiative. And that's where you're really going to get to create and restore habitat, track the progress of that habitat in ways that feel right to you, whether you want to create a medicinal, traditional, indigenous plant garden, you want to create a native habitat garden, a pollinator garden, a rain garden. Those are all really impactful pieces for our ecosystems and the wildlife that call them home. So we want to be supporting you with that. So look out in September for the new Habitat Stewardship Initiative as part of Living Planet at School. And we also want to give a sneak peek to an initiative that Ryan's also launching, the seed orchard. So we've kind of alluded that native plants, while they're very important, very hardy, they're not widely available. So if you go out to your local nursery, it can be tricky to find them. And we need to get on this now if we're going to be building back ecosystems and habitats. So we're actually taking it into our own hands, and we are getting schools and campuses, all types of audiences in the near future to build seed orchards, which are basically where you'll be able to access native plant seeds. So more information to come, but we wanted to share that exclusive sneak peek with our ecom friends, you guys. If you are a student or educator at the post-secondary level, our program is Living Planet at Campus. Through this program, you can register a profile, you can access our container garden guide. There is opportunity for you to create container gardens and track their impact. You can also apply for Go Wild School Grants through Living Planet at Campus. And the seed orchards are going to be a part of this in the near future, so look out for that. And if you are not with schools or campuses, you're an individual who wants to engage with planting native plants, helping us create Canada's biggest wildlife garden. We have the In the Zone program, which is also something you could do in the workplace. So Ryan alluded to how there are some really great garden guides. If you go to inthezonegardens.ca, sign up and you'll have access to all of our different resources. Those drought resistant gardens that I was talking about. There are garden guides to create rain gardens, so many different types of gardens that are appropriate for your area. There's also a button on there, an Ask an Expert button. So that is an exclusive to In the Zone members. Very, very cool. And what happens through In the Zone is we're able to track your impact. We're able to help you track your impact. So while you get to plant native plants, you're also getting to track what's happening with them. What native plants are you planting and what wildlife are coming to visit? That's citizen science. And so you'll be able to track that in your garden tracker and help us build Canada's biggest wildlife garden. And those in the zone plants that Ryan was talking about, those that are available, they're available, right, Ryan, in southwestern Ontario and soon in Quebec. So you'll find our little plant tag that you can see right here on those plants that are available at Loblaw. So that should be happening by end of May.
After May 10th, Kathy, is when we're saying a little bit later in the Quebec stores, but after May 10th.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, super, super exciting. And just increasing the accessibility of these important native plants so that you guys can take conservation action with us. Excellent. So if you're, again, a workplace or an individual, a homeowner, you're very welcome to join in the zone. Students can join as well. So we're looking forward to seeing more of you on that platform. Ryan, were there any last minute words that you wanted to share? We have 8 minutes.
Oh, amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, you've addressed one of the questions, but I'll just maybe take it a little bit further. There was a question about where people can find these excellent plants. And I would say stay tuned to the In the Zone website if you're in Southern Ontario or Quebec, and that map of the Loblaws locations will come up. That's going to be a really wonderful place for you to get your hands on some of these plants. But otherwise, you're going to want to get hooked up with a local native plant nursery. There's a few different resources where you can do that. Again, some in Southern Ontario can be seen on the In the Zone website. You can also visit the North American Native Plant Society website, and they have a list of commercial growers all across Canada. Or there's another website called Can Plant. So that's CAN-PLANT.ca, and they have a really, really wonderful list of nurseries across Canada that include native plants. Not all of them are specialist nurseries though, so you might want to give them a call. There's Can Plant right there. Okay, wonderful. And if you go to resources, is this you doing this, Kathy? Okay,
Yeah.
wonderful.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'm
find a native
totally
plant
finding a
nursery.
native plant nursery.
There you go. So give those folks a call and just have a little conversation with them about ecology, about where their plants come from. The highest quality nurseries are there, but there's also a lot of others that may just carry some native plants along with the typical horticultural plants. So that's what I would say in answer to that question. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, since we have a little bit of time, is you'll notice, so we didn't do a land acknowledgement up front. I understand that the audience here has been hearing a lot of land acknowledgements already, and that's wonderful. But I hope that in our presentation, what you can see is a lot of the same issues that affect indigenous plants are similar. There's a very similar kind of flavor to patterns and processes that have impacted indigenous people. And that's not to say that restoring native plant habitat will magically also restore our relationships that have been broken through colonization. But the thought process of restoration, of building relationships, I think they're related. They're related in a kind of way. And of course, Kathy mentioned one of the ways that you can grow a native plant garden is in partnership with indigenous people. You could grow a medicine garden, for example, or you could grow a Three Sisters garden or something like that. Again, very, very importantly, in partnership with indigenous people to build your relationships amongst yourselves and with the land and with those plants. I think that would be a really wonderful way to engage in ecological restoration if you'd like to go in that direction. Um, what do you think, Kathy? We can take
Well,
maybe a few more questions
yeah,
or
there's some great questions that are in the chat here that I think relate really well to the Go Out School grants and some of the work that Ryan's been doing. So I might elaborate on that a little bit. There's a question about raised beds and engaging students who are affected by COVID. So what's been really amazing about Go Out School grants this year is you can make it your own. So we want you to take your spin on how you would like to engage your students. So we're seeing a lot of Go Wild projects that are at the primary level, secondary school level, and at the post-secondary school level, where teachers are engaging students who are learning from home. So a couple examples that we've seen have been, hosting a container garden workshop and using the funds to get access to container gardens, allowing their students to build them along with the teacher, but from home. We've seen that at the post-secondary level. A student at Western is doing that. He won funding that he was able to use to engage 50 students to make container gardens. University of Waterloo is doing the same thing. One of their instructors is leading a container garden workshop and allowing students and staff who are studying and working from home across Canada to engage as a community, but so together while apart. We've seen lots of really great examples of creating native plants in very urbanized areas. Some schools are, just adopting a no-mow zone and allowing for things to come back wild. Fantastic opportunity for wildlife. But we're also seeing some schools, they're either planting raised beds on cement, or some are even going as far as ripping up some of that cement and planting native beds. So really, it's what suits you and what's possible for you, and think of your journey as a journey. It's You don't have to get everything right in the first year, and there's no getting it right. It's just make it a phased approach and just get started. So lots of different ways that you can get involved, and it's all contributing to amazing impact. Ryan, would you say that too?
I totally agree, and it's a wonderful point about expectations and timing. You can't build an ecosystem in a day or even 1 year, I would say. A lot of restoration projects, big or small, have a, shall we say, a childhood and an adolescent period in which things are figuring themselves out, and that's okay. That's part of the process. That can be, 1, 2, or even more years. So, you know, consider that it's a journey, as you put it, Kathy. It's something that's going to be evolving and shifting and adapting all the time. And each time you go out to the garden, it's going to be a slightly different garden, and you'll learn something new that you never knew before. So just keep going back to it and keep building those relationships.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, this is fantastic. And there's a question about whether the slide deck is going to be available. Uh, that's a great question, Haley. Are the resources going to be made available to all of our viewers today?
No,
Everyone who tuned in?
because we don't have the capacity to know who was where because people didn't
Right.
register. So unfortunately, that's just too big of a job for us to track who was where. So I don't know if you have a way to somehow share now or
You know what I might recommend for folks who want to learn to see these slides or similar slides and more? If you really want to take a deep dive, there is something called the Garden for Wildlife webinar series, which my colleagues and I recorded last year at the beginning of the pandemic. It's a 7 episode series on the WWF YouTube channel, and you will find these slides and many, 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 many more. It's our little Native Plant Gardening 101 course. Is meant to take you from zero to hero. It covers literally every imaginable thing, including episode 3 is all about container gardens. So that's what I would say. If you want to learn more, if you want to see these slides again, and by all means do, because it sometimes takes a couple of moments, a couple of tries to get this kind of information into our brains. I know that's certainly the case for me. It doesn't always get in the first time. It takes a couple of times, and that's normal and okay.
Ryan,
Um,
thanks for mentioning the YouTube channel. There are a lot of, like Ryan said, the entire series is up there, including, in addition to that series, a how to start a container garden guide. So, yeah, lots of fantastic resources. Ryan, you had a last thought. I believe I just cut right into you there.
uh, I'm not sure that I did. Well, I was thinking, did we have time to maybe play this video? But I don't think we do. I think we're at time, and aren't we? That's us.
yeah, unfortunately, I have to go and open up another session for the next group because I'm the Zoom host as well. So I can't do that until we all say goodbye.
No problemo. I think that's wonderful. It's been a pleasure. I loved listening to all of these questions and sharing my garden with you today. And I hope that you will be inspired to do something similar yourselves.
Well, thank you so much, Ryan and Kathy. That was amazing, and I'm definitely inspired to get some more native plants up on my 12th floor balcony in downtown Toronto. So I totally appreciate that, and I think everybody else did in the presentation. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye, but keep in touch. You know, we can do that through social media and all the amazing resources that were shared. Okay. Bye.